Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. Today is another AMA episode. That is, Ask Me Anything. I love to answer your questions, and if you have a question you think is going to be of broad interest, send it in. I'll answer it live on the air. Send your questions to victor@victorjm.com. That's victor@victorjm.com. Today's question comes from Mathieu, who asks, I'm experiencing sellers who are demanding unreasonable terms when it comes to even looking at a property. They're asking me to get the property under contract before even viewing the property, and they're demanding due diligence timeframes and closing schedules that are simply unreasonable for us to accept. How would you recommend we negotiate the property purchase under these conditions? Well, Mathieu, this is a great question. The first part is that the buyer should never be an anxious buyer. The seller is the one with the problem. If you have a process for due diligence, then it makes no sense to cut corners on the due diligence process. Now, that doesn't mean you can't move quickly, but the only time you should consider cutting corners on a deal is when the deal is so deeply discounted that it can protect you from the risks that you might skip in your due diligence. Remember, a risk is only something that's not taken into account in your plan. So you might have 5 or 6 things that could go wrong that you simply don't have time to check. But when you quantify them, when you attach a dollar value next to them, you say, you know what, I'm getting the property at such a deep discount that even if these risks come true, I'm still getting a good deal. Only under those circumstances does it make sense to cut corners on due diligence. See, often the seller is looking to get out of the property because they have a problem. At the same time, they're also often looking to get top dollar, and they're looking for a quick closing because they have a problem that they need to solve. The real problem is often emotional, and it's with the seller. Now is the time for you to ask the seller why they're insisting on such an unusual process. I'd like to hear the answer. Maybe they've had a bad experience and they've wasted a bunch of time with a buyer who was never a qualified buyer. The property might have been tied up for months with someone who never had a plan to close. They lost months and at the end of it had nothing to show for it. That seller may have PTSD from the buyer and they don't even know how to handle it. The most valuable thing you can do at this point is to help the seller separate their experience in the past from their need to qualify the buyer who's currently in front of them. If I look at our own due diligence process, we have a 2-phase process. The first phase is designed to uncover whether the project has a showstopper issue that will kill the project. And if that issue exists, we want to know that quickly. The last thing you want is to spend months on due diligence and then cancel the project. We would have spent a bunch of money on reports and wasted a whole pile of time. If the project is not a fit, you want to know that quickly. We call this process our quick kill list. In an ideal world, you want a quick no or a thorough yes. The last thing you want is a slow no. Explain to the seller that you are a qualified buyer. Show them that you are a qualified buyer and that the seller right now is using a process that is pushing away qualified buyers. You can offer to design a sales process that includes the seller and bring transparency to the entire process. You can show them your due diligence every step along the way. And it's possible that that may not be enough. Sometimes the seller has a need that's far beyond what the buyer can solve. Oftentimes they simply have a belief that this single asset sale will somehow fix whatever problems they might have. It's very dangerous for you to take on someone else's problem and make it yours. A wise friend of mine once said that the pain of low quality far outlasts the pleasure of low price. Said another way, don't accept risks that you're not willing to accept the impact of those risks as a certainty. My experience says that you should never try to convince the seller of anything. Share your process open and honestly, and let the chips fall where they may. If the transaction has an element that's forced, it's probably not going to work. It's got to feel like a right fit for you, the buyer. You need the time to perform all of the due diligence required. That includes getting your environmental assessment, the commercial appraisal, property inspections, construction quotes, a survey, checking if there's any open building permits that haven't been closed, insurance underwriting, and on and on. Our full due diligence checklist consists of over 150 items. I'm not sure what your process looks like, but I know we need sufficient time to complete all these items, and we will not be rushed. If it doesn't fit your criteria, then pass on the deal. It's an absolute fallacy that deals are scarce. You may be having difficulty finding them at first, but they're there and they show up with increasing regularity, especially over the next 6 to 18 months. So never be scared to walk away. If the seller is serious about selling, they'll probably come back to you and offer you a lower price in a few weeks' time. And so I'll repeat what I said at the very beginning, never be an anxious buyer. I want to thank you, Mathieu, for a fabulous question. And for the listeners at home, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.